begin by just thinking about a very familiar experience. Just imagine you're walking down the street and you see another person. It's a very familiar, very straightforward thing. But I want us to take a moment and just look into that a little bit and see what's going on in having the experience of another person, to see what that really amounts to. So you say, I see another person. But, in terms of, the visual data, what you're actually seeing is a body moving through space. But to experience it as another person is something more than that. Right? It's to see a person coming at you is not the same as seeing a plastic bag blowing in the wind. Right? When you see a body moving in space and you take it to be another person, I think what you really sort of mean by that, or what's going on, is that you're seeing that body as, the presence of a perspective, the presence of someone who has a point of view on things. Right? So, you say, I see another person. But it seems to me that what's actually happening in the experience when you use that expression is a little different, right? To see that body walking down the street as another person, I think, is to feel yourself to be looked at, to feel yourself to be something that is for someone else's perspective, right? And what is that feeling of being looked at, right? It seems to me, again, it's not just a neutral, factual thing where you say, oh, I guess I'm offering someone else visual data. I think feeling that you're being looked at means, you're being evaluated, you're being interpreted, you're being assessed. And so I think that especially comes out in situations where, you might do something that's a little embarrassing or something, or private. Imagine you were just walking down the street by yourself and, I don't know, you're in a good mood and you're just sort of skipping along, and then suddenly someone walks around the corner and sees you. You might suddenly think, oh, I hope I didn't make a fool of myself by acting that way. Right? So you don't go through a series of theoretical steps where you say, oh, I see a body moving in space. Oh, I wonder if that's a person. Oh, that means that there's a perspective on me. Oh, that means they're judging me, right? You don't go through all of those steps. But it seems to me, in a very immediate way, though, you suddenly just feel yourself judged because you feel a little ashamed or embarrassed. Right? You sort of tighten up and sort of walk carefully and think, oh, I hope I didn't make a fool of myself or something like that. Right? So I bring out that kind of example to bring out that idea that the encounter with another person has that element of assessment or judgment in it. Right? Because that's really what it means for someone to be a perspective. It means they notice things and they assess them. They determine what their point of view on that is. And then, going back to the body, when you see someone as another person, it seems to me, you see that body as moving the way it does because of that perspective. Right? So, a person, that body is going down the street because that person wanted to go to the store. Right? It's because of what happened in that person's perspective that body is moving in the way it is now. Right? So, I said you notice, you assess, and then a third one is, you respond to things, right? So the person noticed in their kitchen that they didn't have any potato chips. They assessed that and thought that's bad, and then they thought, I want to do something about that and go to the store and get them. Right? And so the body's motion is the expression of the will or the desire of that person to go get some potato chips. Right? And so to see that thing walking down the street as a person is to see that moving body not just like a paper bag blowing in the wind, but to see that motion as behavior, right? As the way some sort of meaningful agent is doing something intentionally. And so that idea that the behavior is an expression of that person's response to what they're seeing and how they're assessing it, also comes up in there dealing with you, right? So, if you're standing there and a person just sort of walks through you and bumps into you and doesn't even care, like that's sort of weird. You think, didn't you notice me? Like, don't I mean anything to you? Right? That behavior was an expression of their assessment of you and their response to you. And their assessment of you was that, yeah, you don't matter. And that's not very nice. Or on the other hand, a nicer example, you might be walking along and a person might just say, hey, how you doing? And there, again, you feel noticed and assessed by that person as someone worthy of being acknowledged. And then their behavior was an expression of that kind of friendly, respectful attitude. So the thing I want to bring out there then is the difference between sort of, first of all, simple visual experience of a body and what it really means for you to be experiencing that as another person. And then those dimensions that are involved in being another person, of noticing, assessing, and responding. And then that idea that you therefore are, when you're having that experience of someone else, you are experiencing the movements of that body as behavior, as expressions of that person's way of responding to the environment. Now, as I said, that person's noticing you and expressing those things about you. So, like, what is it that you do want them to be expressing? Well, they should be expressing that they are recognizing about you those same things that you're recognizing about them, right? You're a person. And so you want the people to recognize that you're not just a paper bag blowing in the wind, right? You want them to recognize the body that they're having a visual experience of as you, as the way a person is present in their world. And so you want their noticing, assessing, and responding to reflect that they have noticed you as a person and assessed you as worthy of respect, and that's what their responsive behavior is now putting on display. So what I want to bring out of that then is that if we just reflect a little bit on what it means to say, oh, I see another person, right? What the experience of another person is, you can see that experiencing another person or being experienced by another person is not just a matter of, the simple visual observation of some factual data. That the very meaning of experiencing another person is that you are feeling a kind of imperative to acknowledge that is a perspective, someone to whom things matter, someone who is a self-responsible free agent. And similarly, that experience brings with it the desire and expectation upon you that person feel the same demand about you, that they feel some imperative to respect and acknowledge you as someone to whom things matter, someone whose behavior is the expression of a meaningful responsiveness to the situation. So that's the first point I wanted to make. So I want to go on now just to explore a little bit more what it means to recognize others and recognize ourselves well. So I was saying, it's an issue how that other person recognizes us and how we recognize that other person. So I want to think about what's involved in that a little bit. And so, maybe you say, oh, I like him or her or them, or I want that person to like me. I want you to think about, again, what's involved in that him or that me that we use. And so let's say the other person says to you, oh, I really like you. They are expressing something, right? That's responsive behavior from them. They're making sounds come out of their mouth. And that's an expression of an assessment. Let's say they're telling you the truth. They might not be. And that's already one of the dimensions of the fact that it's another person. You don't get to see inside their processes. You just get to see the expression, and you have to ask, like, are they being honest or not? But let's, take it that this person is being honest, and this person says, I like you. Well, that's nice, but what did they mean by you when they said, I like you? Right? Because it could be that they think your body has a nice shape. And that's okay. Maybe you want them to think that, or whatever. But, when they say, I like you, they could have meant that, or they could have meant something more like, I like who you are. Right? And so, for the very reason that we started with, right, that you see a body, but you experience that body as the presence of a point of view, right? We started with that notion of this sort of distinction between, the what that's present, a body, and the who that body is, right? Something like that. So that very distinction can also then be reflected in the other person's view on you. They can be taking you primarily to be a body, or they can be taking you primarily to be a who. And if they just say, I like you, you don't immediately know which one that is, and you probably have some care about it, right? But let's say that person does like you as a person, right? Even that doesn't end all the ambiguity, right? Because then we have to say, okay, well, what is it to be a who? And I want to just read you a couple of little Buddhist passages from this book, Early Buddhist Discourses, just because I think they're helpful for thinking about that very question. So first, this is on page 87 in this book. It's from the verses of Sister Vajra. She's talking to this guy, and he says something about a person, and she says, why do you assume a person? You have adopted a wrong view. There is only a heap of processes. There is no person to be found here. Just as the word chariot refers to an assemblage of parts, so person is a convention used when the aggregates are present. And let me read you now a second passage. This is the Buddha speaking. This is now from the Discourse on the Parable of the Water Snake. I'm reading from pages 108 and 109 of this book. And he says, an uninstructed ordinary person regards the body this way, as, this is mine, I am this is my permanent self. And such a person, the uninstructed ordinary person, regards feeling as, this is mine, I am this is my permanent self. And the same thing with perception, dispositions to action, consciousness, and so on. But then the Buddha says, but an instructed noble disciple, someone who's learning the lessons the Buddha wants to teach, says something different. That person regards the body as, this is not mine. I am not this. This is not my permanent self. Such a person regards feeling as, this is not mine. I am not this. This is not my permanent self. And the same with dispositions to action, perception, consciousness, and so on. I'm not going to go through those passages in detail, but I just want to bring out those two ideas. The one from the first verse that says there's not exactly such a thing as a person. Right? There's sort of a heap of processes, an aggregate of processes there. And the second one that says, like you could talk about my body, my feelings, my attitudes, my dispositions to action. But the right view to say is, I am not that. Those things aren't exactly what I am. So what do those things mean, or how might we take those things up? Well, I think the point is here, like, I've sort of already made that point about the body, that you always exist as a body, but to take the perspective on you that you just are identical with that lump of flesh seems to have really missed something about you. And indeed, one of the things about your body is that you can notice it, assess it, and have attitudes about it. And they might be healthy or unhealthy attitudes, but you can have attitudes about it. So it's not so much identical with what you are, so much as, one of the things about which you have experience. The same thing also though with these issues of feelings and so on. Like we tend to, just without even thinking about it, assume that, when something makes us feel a certain way, that makes sense. We say that thing is irritating, or that thing is desirable. We just treat it as a fact that that thing has a character and it elicits a certain sort of feeling from me. But, we can learn about those things, just like we can notice, assess, and respond to our other things or our bodies. We can notice, assess, and respond to our feelings. Like you might think, wow, you know, things like that always irritate me. But maybe that's something about me. Maybe I can notice how I feel and assess that I don't think that's a very good way to respond. And I can then, develop a meaningful relationship to my feeling of trying to change it, trying to change my habits of how I assess and respond to things, right? So once again, then my feelings can't be just identified with me. I mean, I can't exactly separate myself from them. Like I do feel things, but they don't exhaust who I am, precisely because I can take a perspective on them, right? So what I want to get at then is that, we initially made this move from talking about, you as a body to you as a who. But then getting into the domain of the who, it seems to me, which is getting into the domain of noticing, assessing, and responding. Getting into that who, there are again different ways you can sort of pick out what is the thing that is you. And many of the things we commonly associate with ourselves, our familiar habitual ways of dealing with things, our personalities and so on, are not just fixed given facts so much as the ways we have come to act and so on, the ways we have become habituated to making sense of things and making sense of ourselves. And those are things that can change. We can change them about ourselves. And so the point I'm getting at then is that we are actually constantly in a relationship to ourselves and in relationship to others, engaged in matters of interpretation, right? That when I say, notice, assess, and respond, like those things could all really be summed up in that word interpretation. We interpret what another person is. Other people interpret who we are, but we also interpret ourselves, right? We live with views about what I am. And those can be, more or less insightful interpretations, right? And the point I was just getting at is, we can change our views about who we are. We can change who we are. Do you identify yourself with that aggregate of processes and so on? Or do you define yourself by saying, no, that's not me. I don't want to be that person. In other words, are you the person who's inhabiting all those things, or are you the one who is changing? Are you the one who's on the process of, going somewhere else? Right? So, going back then to this issue of what's going on between two people, when someone is recognizing you, they are in a way projecting on you a kind of interpretation. And you, at the same time, project on yourself a kind of interpretation. And so a big issue in our relationships is how those things come together. Other people, through expressing their interpretations of us, effectively serve to confirm or disconfirm our interpretations of ourselves. So the point I want to bring out about relationships here is that, so in the first part I was saying, recognizing another person, in fact, its sort of deeper structure is that it is this imperative that we adequately recognize each other. And now I'm taking that again and saying, so what's really happening there? Well, those relationships of recognition between people are really matters of confirming and disconfirming our interpretations of ourselves and each other. Uh, and I guess I'd like you to think then about the issue of how and when then those things can be good and bad. Maybe you have a bad interpretation of yourself, and another person comes to you with that same bad interpretation, and you therefore welcome it because you find yourself being confirmed. Or maybe you have a good interpretation of yourself, but someone else comes to you with a bad one. And if for whatever reason you're wrapped up with that person, like maybe that person makes it hard for you to hold on to that good view about yourself. Or maybe, you have a bad view about yourself, but the other person has a good one. Maybe that person can bring something really valuable to you. Well, maybe you reject it because of that discontinuity. I mean, there are many, many options, but I'd like you just to think about that issue then, about what it is, going back to that initial question, what is it to experience another person? Well, to think about it in terms of this idea that in experiencing another person, you're experiencing something that confirms or disconfirms the interpretation you have of yourself, and to think about what's at stake there, and when and how that might be good and bad. So I just want to make one last point, and that is that I've been talking about these relationships of recognition as something that happen at the intimate personal level in relationships, but they don't just happen there, right? So I want to talk about a little bit about how these things also happen at a kind of social and impersonal level. So just think of a simple situation, right? Imagine you get on a bus and politely take your seat in one of the available seats, and somebody else sits beside you, and so on. Or a similar example, imagine you go to, I don't know, buy a ticket somewhere, or go to buy something at the drugstore or something, and you appropriately stand in line. Right there, you are behaving again, right? The movements of your body are expressing your noticing, assessing, and responding to a situation. And what your body is expressing is that you recognize you're a person. Let's take the bus example. You recognize that you're a person who's entitled to one seat, and so you think that's proper. And amazingly, all the other people on the bus don't object to you when you do that. And then somebody else comes on and sits down beside you, and you don't object to that either, because you also think they have a right to that. Right? In that very way you're behaving, you are showing, even if you're not explicitly thinking about it, you are showing that you interpret yourself and you interpret all those other people as, having equal rights. You think we're all free and equal individuals with the same rights to the same things. And you are living out of a kind of interpretation of yourself in relationship to others that is the same as the interpretation that those other people are living out of. And so your behavior in the way you act on that bus, or same thing when you stand in the line, is confirming to all those other people who are operating with basically the same interpretation, you're confirming for them that you interpret yourself the same way they interpret you, and that you interpret them the same way they interpret themselves. Right? So your behavior isn't just a practical way of getting transported around the city. And it isn't just a practical way of being able to purchase the thing at the store. It's also playing a role in this big social game, I guess you could say, of mutual self-interpretation. Right? You're behaving that way on the bus and in the line serves to confirm for all those other people that the way they're thinking about things is okay. So, you may think that's fine when it is respecting the equal rights of people. But, people can have interpretations of themselves and of others that aren't so equal and aren't so charitable. So you can imagine, racially segregated societies, like colonial societies, where, white Europeans have come in and, by military force oppressed the native, dark-skinned population. And all of the white people behave around all the other white people in a way that confirms for them their sense that everything they're doing is just right. So, behaviors are confirming of social systems of self-interpretation, whether those things are good or not. So, I was talking about, how you deal with getting on the bus, how you deal with the other people around you, and so on. But, in the same way, all of the ways that you say, I am a woman, I am a black man, I am gay, I'm straight, I am somebody's boyfriend or somebody's girlfriend, like all of those things you would say, or maybe not even say, that's even a step behind that. All of the ways in which you behave from out of that way of identifying yourself, all of those things are, playing roles in the systems, socially defined systems for interpreting ourselves and so on. Right? And so, in other words, those ways you identify yourself, again, are not simple observations of fact. They're forms of self-interpretation, and forms of self-interpretation that are woven into social systems of mutual interpretation that's effectively say, like, these are the terms we're going to use to make sense of ourselves. And you kind of confirm that system by the way you then interpret yourself. So what I'm getting at there then is that, we can often think of ourselves as just having a perspective on ourselves. And we might say, well, I don't care what other people think of me and so on. But the point I'm trying to make, on the contrary, is that the perspectives of other people are already inside you. And that the way you interpret yourself is really the way you're answering to the ways that others interpret you. And so for that reason, it can be very comfortable to conform, right? There are a lot of people around us who, again, without even necessarily thinking about it, just in the way they behave, project upon us the expectation that, you should be like this. And so we fit in very well and are received, by other people with open arms when we accept those terms for defining ourselves. Right? And that makes for a very comfortable kind of system. But it could be the case that your own sense of yourself is at odds with the views other people project upon you. Well, then that can be very difficult. So I want to leave it there. I hope those are just a few provocative ideas to help you start thinking about what a person is, both with respect to yourself, what oneself is, but also what the other person is. And that should then provide a good context for our investigation of intimate relationships.